How y'all doing? So, uh, I'm going to do a video today. We're going to talk about heels, or two types of heels. This is going to be based off of Professor Geek. He does these archetype videos that I really like, and he kind of just brings these things to my attention, and watching them makes me think. So, I want to post a link to his video about uh, villains in the description, and hopefully I don't botch this too much, because this one's a little bit more difficult. I'm going to do a video on baby faces too. That one was a little easier to do, but this one's going to be a little trickier. So let's jump right into it. So there are two types of heels. There are the fallen and the elemental, and the elemental is the standard of villainy. It is the ultimate evil. The elemental is usually a non-human entity, so it's usually like a devil, a demon, or an alien. It has no sense of right and wrong. There is no tragic backstory behind it. There's no misunderstandings about the villainy of the elemental evil. And the process of how it became evil is usually shrouded. It might be mysterious, might be a lie. And so a good Professor Geek gives the example of the Joker from the Batman franchise. That essentially the Joker is a character where we all know what the Joker does, and we don't really know why. He's a character of pure chaos. And there's times where they tried to give him an origin story, but those things never really stick. Because the Joker works as sort of the embodiment of Gotham, because Gotham in itself is corrupt. And this is a man who is absolutely fully corrupt. And, they've tried to bend stories where, I forget which Alan Moore story it was. I'm pretty sure it was Alan Moore that tried to almost define the Joker as far as his origin story is concerned. But his origin story is not important. What is important is what he does. And he is just all villainy, horrible. Talking about gas and numbers of people. It's amazing. But of course, you have the straight up devil from the Bible, or you might have Apep from the Egyptian, or they might call him Apophis, because he's a Apophis, or Apep is it is the eternal villain of the sun god Ra, and Apophis has no origin. Nobody knows where it came from. It's an essence, sort of a thing. It has 100 names. So if you was to look in a book of Egyptian religions or whatever, or Egyptian mythology, you may see Apep, you may see Apophis, you may see any other name, but it talks about this same entity. And that's really because the Egyptians had a thing about names, that something had greater power if you knew its name. So this thing had like 100 names. So that was it was pretty cool, right? I'm actually going to steal that for a story, so don't steal it from me. But that's usually the elemental evil. It is something beyond us that has no function as far as right or wrong. It has no origin story, no tragedy that it has to overcome. It is evil for evil's sake in a way, and it sets the standard for evil. It is the evil for which other things are sort of compared, right? So if you say that somebody is, somebody killed somebody, you then sort of compare them to probably some of the greatest killers that have ever existed. Some guy who shot his wife, while he may be an asshole for shooting his wife, he's got nothing on Jeffrey Dahmer, who's like hunting and eating human beings. You know what I'm saying? And like other type of elemental evil, nobody knows why Jeffrey Dahmer was doing what he was doing, and he was asked while he was alive, why did he do the things that he did? And he had no intelligent answer. Psychologists are still looking it up, trying to figure out like what was his problem. The closest thing he was able to say is that he just wanted to have those people close to him, that he just wanted to keep them with him at all times. And by doing that, he consumed them. He would kill them to keep them there. And then for some reason, he just felt the need to eat them. Like, that's evil on a different level. That's evil way beyond, you shoot your wife in an argument or something like that, which is bad, but there's an inciting incident that led to that. This is where we're going to go to talk about the fallen. The fallen is the second type of villain. It is usually sometimes a person who might be good, or somebody who might be on the rocks, but essentially, the fallen is somebody who fails to overcome some type of tragedy or an inciting event that takes place in their lives. People who fall short, Professor Geek says that it's a cautionary tale of what not to do when you face tragedy or something like that. And he gives the example of Two-Face from Batman. Two-Face is, in some stories, Two-Face is like this upstart attorney, district attorney for Gotham. And all of a sudden he gets acid thrown in his face, and it affects him psychologically. And psychologically he becomes, this man who's torn between two sides. And, eventually he kind of gives way to villainy. But deep down, some people still believe that Two-Face is a good person, but he's still horribly corrupt and he's a murderer and all that type of stuff, right? So these are the two types of villains. The elemental, which is the sort of devil type of creature. And then you have the fallen, who is usually a man who fell into some type of hole and instead of digging himself out, persevering, he sort of decided to find home in it. So how do I talk about this in wrestling terms? Because it is very difficult. It is very difficult. And this is where I feel like I'm going to trip up a little bit in talking about elemental evil pro wrestlers. Because pro wrestling, unlike comic books, unlike movies, in movies you have elemental evils like the Terminator or the Alien, and it that's a little bit easier to do. It's a little bit more difficult to do in wrestling because you usually see the origin story of the villains, or at least you have some idea why they do what they do. So I sat down and I really kind of thought about it to myself, and I said, who could be like some straight up elemental evil characters? And I thought to myself, Ted DiBiase. So Ted DiBiase is one. The $1 Million Man, really, there is no inciting incident that makes the $1 Million Man who he is. He is just evil, and he's just an asshole because he can be. It's just like everyone's got a price, and he wants to see, he's the corrupter. And I think that's my vision of the elemental evils. The elemental evil is always looking to corrupt someone. And Ted DiBiase wanted to see who he could corrupt. And he did that, like during his run, the early part of his WWE run, he would corrupt various people like Andre the Giant. And then later in his career, they saddled him with like the 1-2-3 Kid and Tatanka, but he was instrumental in turning them heel, by utilizing his money. He was able to turn them heel. And in some ways, it had nothing to do with them being good or bad. It was just, he wanted to see, what's your price? What will it take to get you to flip? And another one I came up with is Jake the Snake Roberts. Like, Jake the Snake Roberts is like dastardly. I'm talking like a sinister, evil man. And there seemed to be no cause for it. Like, some of the crazy things that he did to people, there seemed to be no reason for it. Like when he dropped Ricky Steamboat on his head outside the ring, put that giant knot on his head, and carrying the snake to the ring, all these sorts of things. Like, and people was even though people did kind of start getting behind Jake Roberts because he was a darker character, and people sort of enjoy the elemental evils, which is weird because people do love the Joker, so a lot of people do like Jake Roberts as well. But Jake Roberts was like pure evil, during his heyday. Jake Roberts was pure fucking evil. This is the guy who sicked the snake on Randy Savage, who interrupted the guys. I think it was not his honeymoon, whatever that space is between the wedding and honeymoon, the after party or whatever the hell they call it, where the snake in the box. It was like amazing stuff. So I started thinking, like, I started challenging myself a little bit more. How many more could I come up with? And I thought about it and I said, maybe Roddy Piper is another one. Now, there seems to be no inciting incident to why Roddy Piper behaved the way he did in wrestling. Some of the racial stuff that he was saying, obviously, some of the stuff he said about women, stuff he said about Mexicans, it was like there seemed to be no rhyme or reason for it. And he wasn't really a corrupter as much as he just kind of alienated people, and he was like a equal opportunity offender, and that was another one that kind of makes people sort of like him, because he really didn't give a shit about pissing people off, and that was actually his job. He actually took enjoyment in that, but he wasn't really a corrupting force like Jake Roberts or even to the degree of Ted DiBiase. So I challenged myself again. I said, okay, Ted DiBiase, Jake Roberts, and Roddy Piper. They're sort of psychologically violent or psychologically manipulative and or offensive or whatever. What about some physical ones? And the first thing I thought of was Brock Lesnar. So Brock Lesnar is a physical force of nature who just seemingly came out of nowhere and just started wrecking people. He just wrecked the Hardy Boys, wrecked Hulk Hogan, wrecked, the King of the Ring tournament, Rob Van Dam and Test. That Test match was pretty damn good, by the way. But you had Brock just come through and just start slaying people. And there seemed to be no rhyme or reason for it. He just came out of the dark, out of nowhere, and was like this violent brute. And eventually, people really just kind of started to enjoy violent Brock Lesnar, and they kind of went back to it when he came back in 2012. He just came back as just picked up where he left off as a violent brute Brock Lesnar, and that's really enjoyable. Like, he's not a corruptive force; he's like a force of nature. He's like Galactus almost. Like if you to look at him in like the comic book standpoint, like Galactus is a force of nature. Apocalypse in some ways, the X-Men villain, is in some ways a force of nature. And that's kind of how Brock Lesnar is. He's like a physical force. He's not really a psychological threat. And the last one I kind of want to talk about is Hollywood Hulk Hogan. And I picked Hollywood Hulk Hogan as sort of the elemental evil because when he turned heel in WCW, there seemed to be, only Bobby Heenan, because he had a history of saying Hulk Hogan was evil and the worst person in the world, could even see this coming. Like, it was something that nobody even ventured to believe. And there was no inciting incident. It's not like Hall and Nash had beat up Hogan or something like that and then told him, you got to make a choice. And then he made the choice. It's like Hogan was always involved and we didn't know. And now we do know. And, now he's running this conglomerate called the NWO, and he's spitting on titles and he's spitting on people and he's shitting on the fans, and he's just greedy, and he's saying the business wouldn't be anything without him, which in some cases is true, but it just seemed to all come out of nowhere. And I think, I'm not so sure if I would call that fallen, because I don't see any inciting incident that made Hulk Hogan how he is. So let's move over to fallen villains, and what somebody who turned heel because something bad, or there was an inciting incident that almost flipped it almost immediately. So the first one that came to my mind when I thought of this was Owen Hart. Now, Owen Hart, as we know, before he was the King of Hearts, he was sort of plain babyface Owen Hart. And his heel turn began at Survivor Series 1990, I want to say 1993, Survivor Series 93, where he was the only Hart that lost in the Harts versus Shawn Michaels and his Knights. And he was the only Hart that lost. So he's kind of like the embarrassed one, and he kind of took umbrage with that. And then Brett tried to make it up to him to try to be a tag team. And then, it didn't work. It's Royal Rumble 94. Brett kind of scorns Owen a little bit. He didn't want to tag Owen in. Like, he's kind of, he's putting Owen in his back pocket, and it's almost like this. You could actually see Owen slipping, and then out of nowhere he kicks Bret in the leg. He kicks the leg out of Bret's leg, and Owen Hart is a heel. And he went from good guy Owen Hart, good guy, clean babyface Owen Hart, to the King of Hearts, one of the most annoying, best heels in the business. I think he's a perfect example of watching somebody just slip and just, he could have easily have gotten over the concept of being the only Hart that lost in the Survivor Series. He could have gotten over losing the tag team title match, with his brother. He could have got a rematch. He could have gotten over it, but he was, when faced with tragedy, when faced with obstacles, he didn't overcome them. He gave in to his base emotional response, and I think that's kind of what makes him a good fallen villain. So number two, as far as fallen villains is concerned, I guess I want to go with Chris Jericho. Specifically, the Chris Jericho heel turn. I forget which year it is. It might have been '07. I hope I'm not wrong. Maybe so '08, '09. Whenever it is that Shawn Michaels retired Ric Flair that year. I think it's 2010. Yeah, it's 2010, I think. So because Chris Jericho, there was an inciting incident that changed Chris Jericho completely. Like, he was already Chris Jericho, short hair, but he was kind of a baby face. And then, Batista and Shawn Michaels are feuding. And Chris Jericho turned heel specifically because Shawn Michaels lied to him. And he said, I remember the promo, he says, I could have danced for you, but you never would have respected me like you respect Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels is a liar. He lied to you. He lied to me. I'm not going to dance for you anymore. That's kind of when you started seeing that's the fall, right? It was, I can't get away with this. I can never be like Shawn Michaels. So I'm going to be like Chris Jericho. This is the second time he's feuded with Shawn Michaels. And this led to a fantastic run of matches that they had. Specifically their no holds barred match, at least, or the no non-sanctioned, I think it was. But that whole thing was amazing. That whole thing was great, and it completely changed to Chris Jericho and his approach on the business and his look and everything. It was great, and you could see that he was indeed a fallen hero. So another good one would be Bret the Hitman Hart. Bret Hart, he was, of course, he wasn't quite the superhero Hulk Hogan was in the early 90s, but he was very close. But Bret was, the good guy. He was always a little dirty. Bret was always a little dirty. He always did, like, if you watch some of the matches he had with Diesel, he did not mind bending the rules. Bret was there to bend the rules for sure. But it was a series of events. Bret gets screwed at WrestleMania 12. He gets an attitude because he lost at WrestleMania 12. He storms out, disappears for 6 months. He comes back, hero. He comes back still a hero. He gets screwed again. Royal Rumble, 1997. He eliminated Stone Cold Steve Austin, who came back in the ring and then threw him out. Okay, you're really pushing Bret's buttons, and Bret's buttons kept getting pushed until eventually he went over the edge. So I like that. Like that was great. That was fantastic storytelling. How in the account of a year, Stone Cold Steve Austin had pretty much drove Bret Hart insane by costing him the title and costing him big matches over and over again. Bret just got sick of that shit. I'm sick of this. If you guys are not going to do anything about this Steve Austin guy, I'm going to have to do something about it. And when I'm going to do it, you're not going to like it. And I love that. I think that's fantastic. So another one would be Eddie Guerrero, the I'm Your Papi Eddie Guerrero, where they changed his theme song to have a little beeper at the beginning. Eddie was, of course, the most babyface of all time, and then he started feuding with and look, I'm going to catch some heat for this, but he was feuding with somebody that's an aspirational babyface in Rey Mysterio, who is probably the most good wrestler of the last 20 years. Okay, as far as uh, Rey Mysterio, you hurt Rey Mysterio unless it's the Royal Rumble and they were expecting Daniel Bryan to come out or something like that. There really is no reason to boo Rey Mysterio. And then when you have this Eddie Guerrero who is competing with Rey Mysterio and Rey keeps beating him, even though that's his friend, that's eating at Eddie. It's eating at him. And then, of course, he snaps and he beats the shit out of Rey and suplexes him on the steps and rips his mask, busts him wide open. And this leads to, Eddie and Rey feuding over Dominic and this whole ordeal. But it's all about, you could see how Eddie was getting frustrated and he kind of gave into his frustration. He kind of gave into this obsession with Rey Mysterio. And, and I love that. Everybody loves that storyline. They might not love the ladder match, which I personally liked it. A lot of people might not like that match, but that storyline was fantastic. It was great. And so the last one I think I'm going to talk about is Mr. McMahon. Is that you saw the evolution of Mr. McMahon go from this sort of benign character that does commentary, and then out of nowhere, we start the onion starts to unravel a little bit. He screws Brett at the Survivor Series, and then Brett spits in his face. Then he does the Brett screw Brett promo. He's he's pretty much a heel after that. But with Stone Cold Steve Austin, the repeated disrespect from Stone Cold Steve Austin, just the again and again and again, and he just snapped, and he's just kind of like, I don't like this Stone Cold Steve Austin. I'm gonna throw everything in the kitchen sink after him. And to some degree, that is like beautiful storytelling, because a lot of people, if you were my age at the time, you didn't know Vince ran the WWE. I mean, I was a kid when the people knew he was the boss. I was a kid. I didn't know. So in 1996, 1997, I started seeing people go to Vince with their problems. I'm like, he's just a commentator. Like, what's going on? But then by 98, man, like, everything. That Vince is, the booker, and he's doing all this stuff, and he's going to ruin Stone Cold Steve Austin's life. So this has just been me talking about, various heels and, the two types of heels that I see. And I think that, wrestling you can do both in some ways, and they both can be pretty good. Of course, if you're writing a comic book or a novel or something like that, you probably want to have more of an elemental evil, just so you can have clearly delineated good guys and bad guys and stuff like that. Wrestling, you could be a little different with that, but clearly delineate your good guys and bad guys. That's the problem with one specific wrestling company right now, is they don't clearly delineate their villains and heroes. But what did you guys think? Let me know in the comment section below. Like this video, share, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys later.